Good afternoon, Monday, February the 10th, about 2:32 in the afternoon, day after the Eagles dominate the Chiefs 40-22 in Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans. The Eagles are champions. They'll have their parade on Friday, Valentine's Day in Philadelphia. That should be a little bit crazy. Will Parkinson not with us here on the All 32 pod for this edition. He'll be back later in the week. We're dealing with some personal stuff. Everything's good. He'll be back with us again, as I mentioned. Also try to deal with the fact that I'm wearing a hat. It's also a golf hat. I don't play golf, and I don't usually wear hats, so we'll have to muddle through this. A reminder that this show brought to you by PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. Lopsided game, and quite frankly, if it was going to be lopsided, it felt like the Eagles had the potential to do it to the Chiefs, even though we look at the Chiefs and you hesitate because of Mahomes and Reed and the experience and the winning quotient that we talked about. But this game was all about the big boys up front, especially the defensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles. They absolutely bullied the Kansas City Chiefs and took advantage of an offensive line that is not the same. An offensive line that had been struggling to find answers at both left and right tackle, although they ran out the left tackle all year long. And that's what happens when you're paying Juwan Taylor about $20 million a year, but obviously had to make the switch, moving Joe Thuney from left guard to left tackle to try to sort of solidify that spot. And they'd rolled through three different guys. Did not work at all against the Eagles. Credit to Jalen Carter, Josh Sweat, who had 2.5 sacks, Milton Williams on the inside with 2 sacks, Nolan Smith, several reserves as well, including veteran Brandon Graham, rookie Jalix Hunt, who I liked very much, come out of college last year and really came on in the second half of the season for the Eagles. But those guys were physically overwhelming up front. And you saw Pat Mahomes look like a guy that we haven't seen since the last time the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl in 2021. To the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 31-9 was the score of that game. You remember it. Running around for his life. Made some incredible plays in that game, but literally from play one on, he was under siege. Similar situation with the Eagles. And even more remarkable was the fact that the Eagles did not call a single blitz. 42 dropbacks from Patrick Mahomes in the game, and never once did they send more than 4 rushers in the game, and basically telegraphed where they were coming from. Vic Fangio kept it simple, stupid, because he didn't believe that they could stop the guys that he had up front. And certainly that was the absolute case there. Mike Caliendo, who was filling in for Thuney as Thuney went to left tackle at left guard, he struggled all night long with Williams. Taylor, nightmare. It continues to be a poor signing for the Chiefs, and understand why they did it. It's a pretty good player coming over from Jacksonville, but has not made an impact there. In fact, so much so that Josh Sweat moved. He doesn't normally move. Normally stays on the defensive right side, the offensive left. He moved at times to the opposite side to rush against Taylor. And as I mentioned, 2.5 sacks in that game and just was a dominant force. For my money, should have been the MVP. Someone along that defense, the whole defensive line should have got it, but Sweat, for the performance that he had, certainly made a case to be that guy. We'll talk about him a little bit later on in terms of his free agent fortunes, Milton Williams as well. So they had 6 sacks in the game. That's never happened. Pat Mahomes has played 132 games, both in the regular season and the playoffs. That has never happened to Patrick Mahomes. The pressure rate through 3 quarters was 52%. For those of you who follow me for my Patriots coverage, that's what it looked like for the Patriots the first half of the season with Jacoby Brissett under center. Like, completely under siege, as I mentioned in my column for Boston Sports Journal on Monday. Somewhere, Jacoby probably, I got a little shiver, a cold shake. So I remember what this looks like, and it's not very comfortable. And you saw Mahomes, the 2 interceptions, particularly the second one down by the goal line where they're coming out, and it was a big touchdown before the half, or a big score before the half. Joe Thuney gets pushed right back into his legs, never really able to step up into the throw, and it gets picked off, a beautiful interception by Zach Bond. But that's just the kind of day it was where you could tell Mahomes didn't trust what was happening in front of him. And then this is where the combo platter happens. And we always talk about the pass rush and aiding the back end, but there's the need to play complementary, and the best teams can play complementary. And that's what the Eagles did in this game. Their back 7, if you will, because, again, they're rushing 4. They sat in cover 4 60% of the time. They played zone for all but 2 snaps of the 42 dropbacks we're talking about. But in cover 4, what you're talking about really is the safeties come a little bit closer. They're taking away the RPO, which is an important part of what Kansas City does. A lot of these teams do, unfortunately. Maybe we're getting cured of that, but so they take that away. They also sort of muddy the middle of the field. So even though Travis Kelce, not the same guy, there was no shot that Kelce was going to have one of those throwback performances because of the defense they were playing. In addition, cover 4 helps against the run because, again, guys are closer to the line of scrimmage. Didn't matter because Casey hasn't run the ball well all year, and certainly as the score turned quickly in that game, they went away from the run completely. Mahomes was their leading rusher in the game with 25 yards as he just kind of scrambled around. And then I think the other thing that probably tells you, playing that coverage, the cover 4 for, again, right around True Media had it about 60%, is that they looked at the Chiefs' weapons, particularly the guys on the outside, the receivers, Xavier Worthy, Juju Smith-Schuster, DeAndre Hopkins, Watson, Hollywood Brown, and said, we're not afraid of any one of those guys. And I know that Brown and Worthy have elite speed. I mean, Worthy was, 4.21 at the combine, and you've seen it play this year. But we're going to be physical with them, and that speed is going to be negated. And it wasn't until late in the third quarter where Worthy finally caught a deep one on an over route. And then, of course, the stat padding touchdown late in the game against the reserves. But they just clamped down on those guys, were physical. And if you go back and if you have the opportunity, the ability to do it, you go back at the all 22s just to see how well they married the coverage and to see sort of the man principles that get involved when you're playing zone. And you hear it all the time. It's like, oh, you're playing zone, you'll just sit in one spot. No, when a guy comes into your zone, you lock on. But the communication was on point. And the corners in particular, Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, the outstanding rookie, Cooper DeJean, who had the pick 6, their nickel, very physical in those zones, very physical when they could be with the Chiefs receivers, and the communication was on point. So when guys were going from one zone to the next, you saw the level of communication, which Reed Blankenship, free safety, gets a lot of credit for helping set that. Zach Bond in the middle of the defense at linebacker gets credit for, again, sort of bridging the front and the back, but just played so well, so complimentary. And it's kind of it's a really cool thing to watch when you're watching the 22s. And again, not to be the 22 nerd on you, but just when you get to see that picture and see a defense working in unison like that, just 5 fingers in one glove sort of thing, although more than that in this equation, but just an awesome performance by them. Hat tip to Howie Roseman, obviously, and we talked about this. We talked about it before the season started. We've talked about it during the season, but in particular last week when we previewed the Super Bowl, just one of the main reasons that they're here is Roseman's ability to be aggressive on the right players. And he remade the secondary this year in particular, drafting Mitchell in the first round and trading up to get DeJean in the second round. And they went from allowing 34 touchdown passes last year to, I believe it was 22 this season, and just a whole different level of play and athleticism from that group that had gotten old. When Darius Slay is now your second best corner, makes a world of difference. And Mitchell was that good for them all season long. Teams didn't target Mitchell very much this season and didn't have much success when they did. But that was sort of, okay, we're getting old and slow in the back end. We have these young bulls up front. We add this to the back end, and now all of a sudden you combine the pieces and you have one of the best, if not the best defense in football, and certainly played that way last night. I mean, what they did, if you look at some of the historic numbers, if you're into the DVOA and those sorts of things, Aaron Schatz posted after 3 quarters, it would have been the best performance in Super Bowl history from a DVOA standpoint. And obviously, again, the fourth quarter, there was some stat padding there. Mahomes ends up throwing for over 250 yards, but I mean, let's be honest, that wasn't a 250-yard performance when it mattered in any metric. So, yeah, again, shout out to those big guys up front, just the level that they played. We know Carter is a budding star, someone that has already gotten buzz as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in year 2, and that should only grow going forward now that the reputation, you have a Super Bowl ring to add to that. But Nolan Smith really coming on, and the investment there in that defensive line. Carter's a first-round pick, 9th overall. Nolan Smith's the back end of the first-round pick guy. Josh Sweat, a high draft pick. Milton Williams, the 3rd-round pick. Brandon Graham obviously was a first-round pick and, the tail end of his career, but still made an impact as a run defender last night. Hunt's a 3rd-round pick. So they brought a lot of guys. And let's not forget, their big splash in the offseason was Bryce Huff, from a defensive standpoint, at least in terms of free agency. Paid him, I believe, $17 million a year. Bryce Huff fell out of favor pretty quickly with Fangio, did not dress for this game. I would get on the phone if I was a team in search of a pass rusher, because I think we saw Bryce Huff, a damn good pass rusher for the Jets, just never found his place with the Philadelphia Eagles. But that was just such a great performance by those guys. And then you look at it and you say, all right, well, they have a couple pieces they're going to move on, but they also have Jordan Davis, who was a 1st-round pick a couple seasons ago as well. So they just have a lot of bodies, and that's how Howie Roseman has built this thing with the defensive line and the offensive line. Talk about we'll get to that part of it, that part of the equation, their offensive line and how they played. Then you look at what KC went through this year, and I mentioned sort of trying to piecemeal it together on the offensive line and having to do what they did with Tooney, because Suamatia, their 2nd-round pick, a rookie out of BYU, who I think a lot of people, myself included, would have liked the Patriots to take a shot at here. Didn't work. Morris did not work. In fact, there was a point, and there was a good story by, I believe it was Nate Taylor from The Athletic, talking about how Mahomes was usually pretty reserved on the field, yelling at the sidelines to get Morris off the field at one point during the season, because it just was clear he was not getting the job done. They needed to find something else, and that's when Joe Tooney ended up late in the year moving to left tackle. And Tooney's pressure rate allowed was around 10% during the regular season, dropped to 5% or so in the postseason in the 2 games, and then obviously not the case Sunday night against the Eagles, where he got his butt kicked. But they're going to have to look at their offensive line now, much like they did after the 2001 Super Bowl loss to the Bucs, and say, we got to invest more resources there. We have to get better. And they've been good about that. They're constantly working on that. They obviously had the draft where Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, you add Tooney in free agency, but the tackles are a problem right now, and they're going to have to try to fix that going forward. Spags, I thought, Steve Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator for the Chiefs, he did a pretty good job. I mean, obviously, we went into this game thinking they're going to do everything they can to take away Saquon Barkley and put the game on Jalen Hurts, and they did that. Barkley was ineffective, 57 yards rushing, a lot of 2- and 3-yard runs, and you kept waiting for him to bust one, as he's done so often this season. Didn't happen. Not a factor in terms of making plays to help the Eagles win the game. A factor, though, in terms of the amount of resources they presented. If you look at the passing chart, the spray chart, if you will, for Jalen Hurts, you'll notice from the game they didn't throw the ball over the middle of the field. Everything was to the outside. And 2 things. One, and I think you saw it again in the game Sunday, Jalen Hurts throws one of the best go balls in football. Had one taken off the board early when we go, oh no, here we go with the penalties again, and maybe the Chiefs are going to get a benefit of the call. Then there was a horrible, and if you want to call it a makeup call, on McDuffie shortly thereafter for illegal roughness on Dallas Goedert, which was like a football play, and at least with the Brown got him in the face mask on the push-off. So, like, if you get him in the shoulder, he probably wouldn't have got called for the face mask. That's probably why they did call it. So I didn't have a big beef with that. I didn't like the call on McDuffie. But whatever. These things even themselves out, and refereeing was not going to matter in this game, not with the way the Eagles played. But Spags sells out. They do a great job on Barkley, but then Hurts was able to either get outside the pocket on a couple of occasions and make safe throws to the outside to Smith, to A.J. Brown, hit Goddard. Dotson, who has been basically invisible for the entirety of the season, that was a first-round pick that didn't fly for Washington and didn't do much for the Eagles this year at all, but had a couple big catches, including what could have been the first touchdown of the game, although they got him with the knee marked down. But, again, working the ball on the outside of the field, and until the deep post Smith for the touchdown. But as good as McDuffie is, and he's one of the best corners in football, no one matches up with Brown when Brown is involved in the game, when he's mentally in the game. And I sometimes put you'd like him to be zoned in all the time, whether the ball's coming to him or not. But we've seen this with wide receivers. It's kind of how they operate. But Brown was involved early, often, scored the touchdown on the crosser where he was wide open, being chased by Nick Bolton. Sorry, Nick Bolton's a terrific player, but no linebacker is going to run with A.J. Brown. But no cornerback really can compete with A.J. when he's being physical and when he's into the game, and he was into the game. And so there's a couple of release packages that he had in the game off McDuffie when McDuffie tried to get into his face, and it's just like, McDuffie's a strong dude, but he's not as strong as A.J. Brown. Very few guys are, very few receivers are, and he's a dominant force. I know I still wonder about his overall happiness there. I'm sure he's happy right now. They won a Super Bowl, but he definitely wants to be more involved in the offense. So I'm sure they'll have some conversations about that, but he just physically dominated. And Smith is such a, terrific route runner, skilled guy. Again, you can get a little bit physical with him and take him out. But such a good route runner, separation. And I thought Hurts saw it well in this game. In part, he saw it well because of the big guys in front of him. And that's talk about the defensive line. Well, you got to talk about the offensive line and the investments that Howie Roseman made in that group. Every one of the 5 starters on that offensive line, I didn't know this until going into the game. Every one of the 5 received at least one All-Pro vote this season. And both Mailata and Lane Johnson, the 2 tackles, they were second team All-Pros. So the interior guys all got votes, did not make the All-Pro team, but that's sort of the kind of year that they had. And you look at Lane Johnson was, I believe, a Chip Kelly draft pick, but first-round pick, number 4 overall. Mailata's the interesting story where they developed him as a 7th rounder, a rugby kid from Australia, but quickly became an unbelievable story and a terrific player. Both those guys signed extensions this offseason, I think totaling around $80 million. And then the interior, it's Cam Jurgens replacing Jason Kelsey, and he's a 2nd-round pick. And it's Landon Dickerson, a 2nd-round pick who got a big contract from them in the offseason as well. And then Mekhi Becton, who was a top 10 pick at left tackle for the Jets, couldn't seem to get in shape, couldn't stay healthy there. The Eagles take a flyer on him. It was Sirianni who told Jeff Stoutland, their great offensive line coach, hey, let's try him at guard. And he was real good for them at guard this year. And I'm sure off the 1-year contract, he made himself a lot of money going into free agency, whether it's through Philadelphia or somewhere else. And I'm sure someone else might look at him and say, well, let's try him back at left tackle. But that group neutralized Kansas City's pass rush and allowed Hurts to have all the time in the world. I wrote it down. Hurts averaged 3.3 seconds per dropback. And that's an eternity in the National Football League. And then when guys recovered, he smartly used his legs. And he's not as fast as he used to be getting to the outside. I know Tom Brady kept talking about, he gets to the outside. No, to me, when he gets going up the field straight ahead, that's when you sort of see more of the runner that you thought he was, or that he was when he came into the league. I think maybe the last couple of years, some of the injuries beat some of that out of him. But running up the field, smart decisions, knowing when to get down, and he ended up leading the game in rushing with 72 yards. But there were several huge runs, 2nd quarter, 3rd quarter, where, maybe they're in a situation where you force a punt or hold them to a field goal, and instead Hurts is making plays with his legs, extending drives, and it just became too much for the Chiefs, who their defense played pretty well. But when your offense is constantly ceding field position, turning the ball over, and just you're out there over and over again, I think the edge in time of possession was 14 minutes. That's just not going to work. So that is that on a game that was decidedly lopsided. Happy for Hurts, he did not have a very good season this year, especially in the second half. I think we had the numbers. It was 6 of 7 or 7 of 8 where he threw for less than 200 yards down the stretch. But then obviously big game against Washington in the NFC Championship. And then here again, just looked more like the guy we saw in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, the guy that I thought was going to end up being a top 5 to top 10 quarterback. He's probably back in the conversation being a top 10 guy. But to me, it's, sort of the bloom was off the rose a little bit, but that was a very controlled, dominant performance. Played within himself, the 1 interception, which, look, when you're playing a Spags defense, I think he's going to get you every once in a while. And he got him on that one with some late pressure up the middle. I think it was Bolton blitzing. But by and large, dominant game. He ends up winning the MVP. As I said, I would have given it to somebody on the defensive line, probably Josh Sweat, but it's a quarterback award, just like the MVP for the regular season is a quarterback award. I want to remind you, PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Over 10 million members and billions of dollars awarded in winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports. I'll try that again. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. All-Star Weekend for the NBA. Now that, sadly, this is a morning for the end of the football season, at least game-wise. All-Star Weekend is here for basketball. PrizePicks is the best place to win cash while watching your favorite players during the game and the Saturday night events, including the 3-point contest. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. I've had some decent success. I took Juju Smith-Schuster, by the way, 2 catches, more than a half catches. And of course, CLNS with that great offer for you. Just download the app today. Use the code CLNS. Get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use the code CLNS to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And we thank PrizePicks for their support all season long. We're going to do, when Will comes back, we're going to start going team by team, breaking down as we get ready for the draft, needs, where teams can improve, any outside the box thinking that we think they should be involved with. But just based on the Super Bowl, obviously the Eagles are going to have some questions now because you win a championship and there's always that extra dollar signs that come guys' way. You see it every year. Guys get into free agency. I mentioned Josh Sweat, who is a very good edge rusher, but he's never been the best player on that line. He's not the best player now. He's probably, 6th or 7th best guy on the defense. Just happened to be coming off his best game in the Super Bowl. Milton Williams is another one who's never played more than 50% of the snaps, but obviously an impressive pass rusher from the interior. Everyone's always looking for guys like that. To me, that's a $20 million a year player in free agency, I would guess. Sweat is somewhere in the 18 to 21 range as well. So those guys made themselves a lot of money. I would think it would be not that the Eagles haven't found ways to be creative. I talk about Howie being aggressive. I talk about the owner, Jeffrey Lurie, always willing to write the checks and spend real cash, which is not something that all these teams like to do. All these teams' owners like to do. In fact, very few do. These guys will. So maybe they get creative and can keep one of those guys. Jordan Davis alongside Jalen Carter. Maybe they feel like we'll just try to hit somebody else in the draft somewhere in the 2nd, 3rd round. It's obviously a very deep draft, as we've talked about from our experience at the Senior Bowl and starting to dive deep into that it's a great defensive line class for both edge rushers and interior defenders. So maybe that's the way they look and decide not to spend the money in that place. So they'll have some questions there in terms of how they try to keep the defense going strong. But they have the foundational pieces there for sure. And Zach Bond's another one that will he made himself a lot of money. I'm sure, I know Philadelphia tried to get something done with him during the season, just couldn't come to terms. And now you sort of became a point where like, look, I'm this close to free agency again, and I'm having this awesome year. Again, a Defensive Player of the Year finalist, where it probably behooves me to at least see what's out there in free agency. But he was such a terrific player for them. Guy who came over as a special teamer / edge guy from the Saints and became an interior inside linebacker, and just awesome athlete, awesome season, going to cash in big. So those guys are definitely looking and will get massive raises. Can't keep all 3 of them, I wouldn't imagine, but maybe they keep one and let the other 2 walk and go to replace him. In terms of Kansas City, I think this is the same thing as 2021. They looked at 2021 after got their butts kicked for the offensive line, and they said, we're going to fix offensive line. And they went out and they made moves. Orlando Brown, they traded for a 1st-round pick to get him from the Ravens. Of course, now he's moved on playing for Cincinnati. They later signed Taylor. They signed Tooney. They made all sorts of efforts to improve that offensive line, and they're going to have to do it again. Patrick is such a terrific guy, off platform, moving around, but you don't want him moving around like that. That's just, I know he's had the ability to bounce back from all these injuries that he's had, but like he's getting a little older, getting a little bit slower. Like you're going to have to do a better job protecting him. And I think the other thing they're going to have to look at is the receiving core. And Rashee Rice had the catastrophic knee injury this year. Don't know where he is in terms of his rehab. Obviously, he's had some off-field stuff as well. So, it's like one of those things where they probably cross their fingers and hope that he's on the straight and narrow. Hollywood Brown's a 1-year deal. Can't vanish like that in a big game. Will he take another 1-year deal? Mahomes had pushed for that. And obviously he had the injuries all year long. So maybe they look at it and say, we didn't get to see the best of Hollywood Brown, although he did make an impact coming into the last game in terms of their offense was much better when he was on the field. If you want to go with the nerd numbers, the EPA and all that stuff. Worthy, good player, still really skinny, still a problem. You saw the physicality. How much weight can he gain without losing that straight line speed and that explosiveness? That's always the thing. So, and then obviously Travis Kelce's not the same player. And I would assume that he comes back because they didn't win and he'll want to go out and he'll be in the mix again next year with Mahomes. But they have to look at that group as a whole, the receiving group, tight ends included, and say, we've got to do better for Patrick. He elevated us for a couple Super Bowl wins without Tyreek Hill. But we asked him to do too much between having to run around for his life and then these guys not being able to separate. Even when they did, Hopkins, they finally, he rolls out. It's a tick, ball's a little tick off, but like Hopkins tripped over his own feet. I mean, I don't know if he would have still been running. He's not the fastest guy, but that was a 25, 30-yard gain, no problem. And again, who knows? Probably wouldn't have made a difference, but it's the butterfly effect. You don't know if that one play leads to another, and all of a sudden they score, and then maybe Philly gets tight and whatever. It didn't happen. They any opportunity they had, they could not cash in, and that was one of those cases. And then again, when you watch the 22s, just not a lot of separation. Those guys just weren't getting open, and when they did, usually Mahomes' eyes were in the wrong place because he had already realized that we can't block these guys up front. So there'll be questions and decisions there. I'm trying to think defensively. Nick Bolton scheduled to be a free agent. It's obviously an important piece for them at linebacker. Reed, the safety, Justin Reed, he also is a free agent. Good player, very good tackler. That would be someone I'd want to keep if I was them. Both guys would be. But again, you have to figure out, is the owner willing to write out the big checks? Because he hasn't necessarily been the guy that loves the big checks. I know he paid Mahomes and he paid Kelce, but like he tends to be a little bit reluctant with some of that stuff. So those are sort of looks at those two teams. Mahomes put it all on himself. I appreciate that. It was a bad game for him, one of the worst. There was all this talk. I don't even like to engage in it because it's just foolish and it's a talk radio thing, but the GOAT talk and like, well, if he did it, the only thing that would have happened had they won you could have puffed out your chest if you were a KC fan. And the GOAT conversation with Brady is that, okay, well, he won 3 in a row and Tom and the Patriots never did that. Well, now that's dead and gone. And he has 3 titles. Tom has 7. It's like, I'm not trying to protect Brady's legacy. I just don't understand the conversation. Again, would have tweaked it a little bit, obviously, with the 3 in a row, but that didn't happen. He's got a long way to go, and he's got to figure out, like Tom did. Tom found a second win to his career, and he's gonna at some point he's gonna realize I can't do all of these things that I do, and I'm gonna have to win a little bit more from the pocket and be a little bit more cautious with my body. And we'll see if he can make that adjustment, because we certainly know from a physical standpoint, the arm, the football intelligence, like he's got all the juice. He's a great quarterback. He's one of the best ever. But the GOAT conversation, you can just stop bringing it up for a while now, because the three-peat's not happening. And if they wanted to do that again, you got to wait at least 3 more years. So let's leave it at that. I want to thank you for tuning in to this shortened edition of the All 32 pod. As I mentioned, Will be back with us later in the week. Miss my brother out here today, but we'll get it done soon. Thank you as always for listening. It's probably not the greatest to hear me talk for 30 minutes straight, but I appreciate that. Try to mix it up a little bit for you. As always, like, listen, subscribe, rate, review, do all those things, YouTube or anywhere where you get your podcasts. Spread the good word, and we will be back later in the week Thank you and see you.